time and being hungry. It was the Sabbath, and the Pharisees were looking to call Jesus out on things. They did, especially with the disciples. As we see in verse 2, it says, "See, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Now, normally, if you are a believer and you call out someone else for doing something unlawful on the Sabbath, if we have strong convictions and we know that what we're doing is holy, then we're good with it. But we realize here with the Pharisees, there's a problem because Jesus has something to say. It's Jesus who has a problem with the Pharisees. He says, "Haven't you read what David did when he and those who were with him were hungry? How he entered the house of God and they ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for him or those with him to eat, but only for the priests." And he continues on and he says, "I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You would have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." So what we realize is that what the disciples were doing was okay. It wasn't actually breaking the law of God, although the Pharisees thought it did. So what has happened here in trying to keep the Sabbath holy, what the Pharisees have actually done is they've sabotaged the Sabbath. So our main point remains in this part of the section, and that Jesus is Lord over the Sabbath and all things. That's one thing that you can, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who follows Jesus, you believe in this truth that Jesus is Lord over the Sabbath and all things. Now, the difference between the Old Testament law and the New Testament law is not that because there's the New Testament law that the Old Testament law disappears. That's not what it means. But the difference is that you have the OT law and then you have Jesus when he comes. A lot of people think like, okay, well, maybe he's lowered the standard or he's messed with it, and what he's called us to do is lowered it as well. No, but what Jesus is actually saying when he comes and he reinstates certain laws and he gives new laws, what he's actually doing is he's going above and beyond the law. So keep the Sabbath holy. For instance, keep the Sabbath holy was the OT law. What Jesus is saying is he's not saying don't keep it holy. What he's saying is there's a higher bar than that. So now it's not just keep the Sabbath holy, but keep every day holy. Like every day is to the Lord. You find your rest in Jesus always. You always have Jesus through all the trials and temptations and the hardships. That's a higher bar than what the priests had to do, right? And for this, I want to give you some perspective. There's a lot of good things in life, right? So if we just live every day, whether you're a Christian or not, you can say it's a good thing that you have a job. It's a good thing that you have a family. Like my mom has 7 sisters. One of them has passed away recently, but there's a word in Korean that we would use that we would refer to them as the 8 princesses, right? Like they would always call one another, they back one another up. But sometimes I call out my mom on it. It's like, like you love your sisters, all 7 of them, more than you love my dad, right? And your husband, right? So, I would do that, mess around with her. But ultimately, there's a lot of good things in life. You could even argue that money is good. And I might even join you in that argument. However, good things can become idols if they become ultimate things. Good things can become idols if they become ultimate things. And this reflects the Pharisees who have tried to keep all 613 laws right, and they had a lot of them probably memorized them and know more of them than all of us do combined. But those good things, the good law, had become an idol of the Pharisees to where they became ultimate things. And that's why Jesus has to call them on it. When they're calling out the disciples for eating on the Sabbath, he has a problem with it because, whoa, hold up. That law was made for man and not man for the law. So good things can become idols if they become ultimate things. So ask yourselves, what good things in your life have become idols? Verse 9, it says, moving on from there, he entered their synagogue. He saw a man who had a shriveled hand, basically a messed up hand. And in order to accuse him, they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So here, there's already a problem. The Pharisees, they're not worried about the thing they should be worried about But immediately what they're trying to do is they're trying to find fault in Jesus. And that is a problem in their hearts. Immediately they know they're helping Jesus walk into a situation where they know they're going to do opposite of what they believe. And Jesus, again, has something to call them out on. He says, "Who among you, if he had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't take hold of it and lift it out? A person is worth far more than a sheep. So it is lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath." Now, what we can conclude from this is that Jesus values humans more than any other creation. Now, this is like kindergarten. Like, I think even my son knows this truth, but this is something that you need to continuously be reminded of, is that Jesus values you in your life more than any other creature. That's straight from Jesus and God and the Imago Dei and being made in the image of God. That's what separates humans from a dolphin, right? I'm learning about all these different creatures, and it's pretty marvelous and amazing because my son, he goes, as you guys know, he loves cars, but he's been at all the ocean freak, right? I'm just waiting for him to tell me that he's anti-plastic and that I can't use plastic straws. I'm just waiting for that day. But like there's like 15 different whales, and if you look at the whales, like he's able to differentiate what types of whales there are. It's pretty amazing. Like I just look at the whales, and I'm like, I wonder what whales taste like, right? No, I'm just kidding. So all these things, there's so many creatures in the world, okay? But ultimately, humans are above all those creatures. Now that's from Jesus. Now if you want to take it from a person, Martin Luther, he says this: "Man is distinguished from all other creatures in that he alone, and she alone, your woman, is created in the image of God." The Lord calls Christians to do things in faith and provides a miracle if it aligns with the Father's will, which is what we're leading up to with this situation with the shriveled hand. Now, what you can take from context is this is a hand that was probably barely moving, or some say that it wasn't, and it was a damaged hand to where it was basically a useless hand. So this person who is in the synagogue and his hand is damaged, messed up, one of them, and unable to move. The Pharisees see that, and Jesus wants to heal that hand. But what we see here is the unique thing about it, because it says in verse 13, "Then he told the man, 'Stretch out your hand.'" Okay, so you have to stop here because this is weird. Like if it's a shriveled, messed up hand, it's probably barely moving or not at all, and Jesus himself is telling him to stretch it out, right? So if you're that person, you're thinking, well, the whole point that I need healing is because I can't do that. I can't stretch it out. So Jesus, while he is going to heal the hand, he actually commands the man to do something first, to stretch it out. And in that process, the healing takes place. So what that tells us is that Jesus commands his people, but also gives the empowerment to fulfill his commands. That makes sense? So Jesus, in one sense, he is telling his disciples, he tells his disciples to do a lot. And for us, we're told to do a lot. Okay? But in those commands, Jesus is not just telling us to do something, but also he gives the power in order to do that. So with this person, he's teaching them faith, right? So as you're telling someone who has a broken hand to move his hand, in that he's calling out, he's commanding that he moves his hand, but at the same time, he's empowering that movement of the hand. For instance, when Jesus calls his disciples, and now us, Matthew 28, 18 through 20, go and make disciples, right? So he tells us, as you're going, go and make disciples. Now, I've resurrected, like I'm going to go up to heaven. I'm going to leave you to go and make disciples. He's telling us a commandment, but at the same time, what he tells us is all authority has been given to me, and now I'm giving you the Spirit. So now as you go and make disciples, which is the commandment, you're empowered to do so. Right? So this, like, Jesus is not just trying to be tricky, although you have to follow the logic. What he's telling us to do is he's going to command us to do a lot of things, but in that process, you're going to be empowered to do so. I'll give you a personal illustration. So Corrie ten Boom, she was someone who was a part of the Holocaust, and she survived a Nazi concentration camp. And later in her life, to her dismay, she met one of the guards who was responsible for her suffering in the Nazi concentration camp. And that guard, now this is years after, many years after, asked for forgiveness. And in that moment, she tells us that she felt unable to, emotionally and physically, and I think we can all understand that. But she felt incapable of forgiving that guard. So she recounts that she prayed silently, asking God for help, and chose to obey by extending her hand to that person. She later testified that God supplied the love that she did not have, and she felt a supernatural warmth as forgiveness flowed. So Jesus' command is for us to forgive even our enemies, but in that command, he supplies the grace and the power to do so. So when Jesus tells us to love our enemies, he gives us the love himself, and that love empowers us to love people who are unlovely. You guys are following that. So you might not feel forgiveness, but obedience comes before emotion, and God supplies the love when we step forward in faith. So that stretch of the hand is significant in that that person is stepping out in faith to do what the Lord has commanded, and in that process he has empowered him to do so. Okay, so a question for you, if you guys have not been able to follow, is how many of you guys like pie, right? So we got, like, this is one thing, so I manuscript a lot of my sermon, like one thing that I didn't need to do was, when I mentioned pie, I know all the flavors, right? So I don't need to write down all the different types of flavors. We got some boysenberry, right? If you like Knott's Berry Farm, we got boysenberry. You even got blueberry pies, which aren't as popular. You got pumpkin pie, right? $5.99 at Costco during Thanksgiving season. You got apple pie. Lamont's a big apple pie person, right? We got pecan pies. We got all of them, or pecan or pecan, whatever you want to pronounce it as. You got all these different types of pie. But let me tell you, you never see humble pie on the menu. The harder I try, the harder the Lord humbles me. And the more humble I am, the more the Lord shows me what he is doing and what I cannot do. I'm going to refer back to this pie illustration, but just keep it in your head. Jesus, in his gentleness, you have to realize, so as we continue on in this story, Jesus is aware of all this that's going on, and he withdrew, and large crowds followed him, and he healed them all. But he said he warned them not to make him known, so that what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. And he mentions that. But I want to highlight this part, right? So they're pursuing Jesus. They're trying to get him killed, right? They're plotting to try to kill him. And Jesus easily, in his supernatural power, like he could ask the Lord, like he could shut them up, he could kill them, he could do a lot of different things with his power, but he chooses not to because it wasn't in the Father's will, and Jesus fulfills the Father's will. So what we see here is Jesus' gentleness restores, and it is in the Father's will. Jesus didn't have to flee from the Pharisees, but he chose to, meaning that he would not use his power for his personal use or safety. Had to be in the Father's will in order for him to do so. So, thus, this illustrates that Jesus demonstrated that he preferred not to fight others when it was not necessary. Okay? So when we recognize our identity and destiny as followers of Jesus, we may also be less concerned with what the misinformed think of us. Again, Jesus did not do things for personal use or benefit. And he did the Father's will. Now, here he highlights what we see in Isaiah. It says, verse 18, "Here is my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not argue or shout, and no one will hear his voice in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed, and he will not put out a smoldering wick," which is a weak flame, "until he has led justice to victory. The nations will put their hope in his name. So this idea of he will not break bruised reed, it refers to how Jesus will lead the weak and oppressed with gentleness. Jesus refuses to advance God's kingdom through force and self-promotion and sinful anger. So point 3 is that Jesus calls his people to walk in humble and gentle obedience, not perfection. Now, be careful when you try to re-quote me on this. So what we're not saying is like as you become more and more like Jesus, you're on that road of quote-unquote perfection, but realize that on that path, on that journey, if Jesus is humble and gentle and lowly, he's calling his disciples and us to model that as well. So the gospel is not that you don't fail. The gospel is you will fail, but Jesus will perfect you. You are becoming more like Christ. But in that process, it's more about obedience rather than it is perfection. Question I want to ask you guys is, are you hurt, broken, weak, hopeless, unlovely, unforgivable, lost? Let me ask you this again. Are you hurt, broken, weak, hopeless, unlovely, unforgivable, lost? I think for me, in certain seasons, all of these apply, right? I love those tests where they say all of the above. Generally, those easy tests, it's usually all of the above. But if it's even just one of these things, the truth that the Lord has for you today is that Jesus heals the hurting, he repairs the broken, strengthens the weak, gives hope to the hopeless, loves the unlovely, forgives the unforgivable, and saves the lost. So if this is any of you, if you're in any of these categories, whether you're hurt from a situation, whether you've been broken by a person, or whether you're feeling weak because of a situation or a lost job, or whether you just feel hopeless about life, Jesus has an answer for you. For all of those things, Jesus heals the hurting, he repairs the broken, he strengthens the weak, he gives hope to the hopeless, he loves the unlovely, he forgives the unforgivable, and he saves the lost. And with that, there's 3 truths that you can speak into your life, is that there is power in Jesus' mercy and grace. There is power in Jesus' quiet gentleness, and there is power in Jesus' servanthood. We know all these things to be true, and the Lord is faithful in all ways to us, that he has given us the ultimate truth in Christ. So may we trust in that power. May we know that he is good in his mercy and his grace that is unconditional. And as Jesus has shown us through the Pharisees, that there's a quiet gentleness, right? If you're someone like me who's emotional and if the emotions get the best of you, right? A lot of us like to take an Ephesians passage or we like to say, in our anger, don't sin, right? So we can be angry and not sin, not realizing that more times than not, we are people who get angry and emotional and sin in our anger. The only person who is able to get angry and not sin is Jesus. That doesn't mean you can't get angry and not sin, but what it does mean is that there should be a gentleness about our soul and the way we carry ourselves and the way we live that models Jesus, in where we can respond to conflict in a quiet gentleness that reflects in the same way Jesus' servanthood. So back to that humble pie analogy, right? So we have all these different amazing, delicious types of pie. You never hear about humble pie. And the reason is because you are the chef of your own life. And as the chef, you are a prideful chef. And prideful chefs do not serve humble pie. That is a desire in our hearts as we live life. What we realize is that although we are called to live more dependent on Jesus, what we end up doing is we become more independent. So I've seen more people fall to sin, to the love of money, even as Christians who have lived their whole life. Like if they get the prime job that they've been looking for, the first thing to go out is not money, it's church. Right? If things are good and you've gotten the dream car and you feel blessed by the Lord in every aspect of your life, from the wife to the children to the promotions to the retirement, the last person on your mind oftentimes is the Lord. So with that, what we realize is that there needs to be humility. That the Lord, even now, if you're breathing and if you're hearing this, right, the Lord is giving you that. I've shared with you guys about my neighbor, and my neighbor has had a lot of hurt from the church, but immediately when he got diagnosed with loss of hearing, he came to me and he was crying, and he was like, Pastor Sam, like, well, I thought it was just Sam. You're like, no, you're Pastor Sam today. Like, I need the prayers. If the Lord heals me, all my sinfulness, all the beer that I get drunk on, all the smoking that I've done, brother, like if the Lord heals me right now, like I will follow that person you call Jesus, and I will follow him as Savior and Lord. He didn't use that direct language. That was his point. Now, I have no doubt that the Lord could heal my neighbor in his healing. I have no doubt of that. I've seen crazier stuff, crazier healings happen all across the world. But there is a danger when you put a condition on your Savior and Lord. That was the problem with the Pharisees. They didn't even realize the whole law that was pointing back to Jesus. They're trying to keep the law when they don't realize the law is in Jesus, and Jesus sets the standard. And he set a bar higher than the law, the 613 laws that they're aware of. Right? The issue is not with having a desire to be healed. The issue is that you demand that when the Lord is actually demanding your humility. Remember, if you're someone who is hurt, broken, weak, hopeless, unlovely, unforgivable, lost, and the Lord redeems you from that, you have to realize your place. Even as Brother Dagmar, he preached for us last week, the truths of the gospel. You were dead in your trespasses. There was no way that you could save yourself, and Jesus saved you. Now, with that truth, with that good news, may you live in that same way. That you're not someone who's drawn by the sinful nature, but you realize that the sinful nature does try to draw you in, but you continue to seek Christ. And as you're doing that, I want to put this heavy burden on you. I'm going to land the plane. I'm landing really early. This might be one of my shortest sermons ever. Now, I'm going to land the plane with this, in that we have a lot of work to do as Christians, as followers of Jesus. And what I mean by that is, recently I went to a sauna with a really successful businessman. I didn't go there with him, but I met him there, and we were sharing, and he was interested about my life, and we got to share. And ultimately what I learned about his business was that it makes over $100 million a year. And immediately I knew the success, right? Even though he was telling me about what it means to be humble, right? So he drives a Toyota, which is pretty humble considering his business makes over 100 million, but his wife has 4 Range Rovers, 4 Teslas, all that. But he was sharing with me, and after he learned about what I do, he was kind of impressed with me in one sense. I'm not trying to compliment myself, but what he was trying to point out to me was that, man, like, I'm telling you all this, you're not really interested in what like, he could tell, even though I didn't explicitly say that I'm not looking to make money. He was like, oh, I noticed you don't really have that drive that people have in pursuing money. Like, to have, like, normally when I share this, or when my wife meets with people, like, everyone's like, oh, wow, like, your husband's so amazing, like, you have the nicest stuff, all these several houses in different countries, and it's like, you're just different. But the reason he shared that with me was he wanted to contrast a friend of his who recently came back to the States. So that friend met the Lord and felt like he needed to do missions for the rest of his life. So he sold his house, sold retirement. He went to unnamed country to go on missions. But he was telling me that he recently came back. Okay, And because he came back and he's no longer doing missions, he has no money and he needed a job. So this owner, he said, yeah, so only because he's my friend, I gave him a job. And I give him a lot of money, way above to where he's considered rich. But the reason I share you this is because he saw the Christian's work ethic, this ex-missionary, and over the past few years, he confessed to me, he's like, man, I know why my friend was a missionary. He's lazy, he doesn't work hard, he's not devoted, he barely gets the job done. And I was really heartbroken because I was like, man, so these successful business owners who work really hard, and I acknowledge that they can get their $500 massage, like praise the Lord for that they work hard in that part, but he's not following the Lord. But the sad part of it is that kind of the stereotype for the missionary was, oh, you go on missions because you don't have anything better to do, you don't got any other talents, you don't work hard, you're not devoted to what the Lord has assigned you to do. And that was a heartbreak because, and I was able to tell him stories of missionaries who have been super faithful and work really hard and all that and given up big careers in order to do that. But we have a heavy weight in where the Lord has set the bar here, and we're going for this American Christianity, this consumerism, which has really watered down the gospel to where you walk into churches and you always expect something. So I've talked to several people who reach out to me who want to visit our church and things like that, and I always ask like the reason why they left the church that they were prior to, and it's always, well, I didn't get this, or I wanted this, and this needed to be here, and I understand that there's situations where that could be true, and that could be 100% the reason, but we have to realize if that the church is all about what you get, there's a problem, because the standard that Jesus has set, his bride being the church, right? Ephesians 5, his words, and he gave himself up for the church. The church is called to be holy and blameless, right? So there's a standard that the Lord has set. Even as these Pharisees who think they're all that in a bag of chips, Jesus is calling them because no, you're not even keeping the standard that I have. You're trying to say keep the Sabbath holy, but what you've done is you've lowered the bar and you've created your own laws trying to say that you're keeping that when you're not. And for us, that's true, that we should not be consumers, but we should point people to Jesus, because Jesus is the one who redeemed us. So that's my challenge to all of us. The application here is the pie we need but we don't want, is that we need some humble pie. That's the application for us. Humility is rarely chosen, but it's often the thing that God uses most. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. May we be humble before the Lord.